Kei Taniguchi climbed walls that send a chill through the gut of most mountaineers. The first woman ever to win the Pialet d'Or for 1,800 meters of an impregnable face on the 7,000er Kamet. And yet, that's not where she died. In December of 2015, on a tiny Japanese mountain called Kurodake, less than 2 kilometers high, she stepped a few paces away from her companions, unclipped her rope, and never came back. How does the best climber on the planet fall on easy ground? And what happened behind that rock? To understand it, we have to go all the way back to the beginning. On July 14th, 1972, in the city of Wakayama in western Japan, a girl was born who would be named Kei Taniguchi. She grew up in Abiko, a quiet suburb northeast of Tokyo. Flatland, no mountains anywhere near. An ordinary family with nothing to hint that one-day climbers all over the world would know that name. The turning point came over a book. As a schoolgirl, Kei read about the Japanese explorer Naomi Uemura, a man who went alone where others wouldn't dare, onto high summits, across frozen wastes. And then, Uemura vanished. In winter he set out for Denali, the highest mountain in North America, and never returned. They never found him. Any normal reader would draw the obvious conclusion. The mountains take even the strongest, so keep your distance. Kei drew the opposite one. The peak that swallowed her hero became her dream. She decided that one day she would climb Denali herself. A girl from the suburbs set her sights on the very mountain that had refused to let go of Uemura. But the road to the big mountains runs straight through the most ordinary of lives. After school, Kei spent a year as an exchange student in the States, learning the language, getting used to being alone far from home. She came back and enrolled in evening classes at Meiji University in Tokyo. She worked by day and studied by night. She paid for her own education and never pushed that burden onto anyone. Quiet, grinding work that toughened her up, just as much as any sport. She had almost no free time, and the little she had didn't go to rest. At university, Kei joined the cycling club, and the bicycle became her first real school of endurance. Whole days in the saddle. She kept pedaling when her legs were already burning, and she wanted to pull over to the roadside, and she alone decided how much farther to ride before dark. Fatigue you simply have to endure. Discipline that nobody but her was keeping in check. It was here, in these efforts, that the character took shape which would later surface on the walls of the Himalaya. Kei learned to stand alone against hardship and not give in when things got truly tough. She wasn't a climber yet. She had never been at any serious altitude, but the dream of that far northern mountain was already lodged inside her, and step by step, it was nudging her toward a decision that would turn her whole life upside down. Soon these rides carried her farther and farther, beyond Japan, into foreign countries, onto foreign roads. A student hobby became a way of getting to know the world on her own 2 legs. Thousands of kilometers, and with every one of them, her craving grew stronger for effort, for movement, for a life with a goal and with risk. But all of it had to be put on hold for a while. In the late 90s, Kei finished university, took a job at a PR firm, and put in about 2.5 years at a desk. A stable, predictable life, exactly the kind that slowly began to suffocate her. Every morning, she'd put on her office clothes, while in her mind she was more and more, often out where there was open space and exertion. The mountains were calling louder than a career behind a desk. In the year 2000, she took her first serious step. She joined the Kei Sanokai Mountaineering Club in Tokyo, and then she found a sport that brought together everything she had: endurance, navigation, teamwork, the ability to go for days without sleep. Adventure racing, grueling multi-day contests across wild country. In 2001, Kei won the Izu Adventure Race. That same year, she lined up for something far more serious. The Eco Challenge in New Zealand, one of the toughest adventure competitions in the world. Here teams cover hundreds of kilometers across mountains, rivers, and forests with almost no sleep. Racing for Team East Wind, Kei finished the course in 11th place. For a newcomer to top-level adventure racing, that's a strong result. For Kei, it was a kind of final test. She proved to herself that she could withstand extreme loads and not break when her body was begging her to stop. And then, she made the decision she had been moving toward for years. In 2001, she quit her job. She walked away from a steady paycheck and a clear routine for the sake of something that brought neither money nor any guarantees, for the sake of the mountains. That step would define the entire rest of her life. Ahead lay the unknown, where no one would catch her if she fell. How high she would climb and what she would pay for it, Kei did not yet know. But the direction was chosen, away from cycling roads and toward real mountains. And her first goal was the very mountain she had dreamed of since school. In 2001, Kei first set foot on the slopes of Denali. The climb succeeded. She reached serious altitude, where the air is thin and you pay dearly for a mistake. Denali is no bicycle course. It's another world, and Kei realized that she wanted to stay in it. And the door to the big mountains opened for her from the most unexpected side. She came to the Himalaya not as a conqueror of summits, but as a cleaner. In 2002 and 2003, she joined the expeditions of the Japanese climber Kei Taniguchi, who was putting together teams to clear Everest of trash. For decades, expeditions had left tons of junk on the slopes: empty cylinders, torn tents, scraps of rope. All of it has to be dragged back down by someone. There's zero romance in that work. The highest mountain on the planet appeared to Kei not as a shining dream, but as a littered, sullen place where even a simple movement at altitude drains all your strength. She worked the north, Tibetan side of Everest, climbing from camp to camp. Gear, other people's garbage, her own exhaustion. She hauled all of it on her own back. In 2003, she reached an altitude of around 7,300 meters. She had never been higher. And it was right here, amid other people's refuse and the icy wind, that the most important thing happened to her. Kei truly came to know altitude for the first time. She got used to how the body behaves where there's half as much oxygen as down below. Your head spins, your legs turn to lead. Every step has to be fought for. She learned to move and think where an unprepared person simply wouldn't survive. So, clearing trash became her school. Through dirty, thankless work, Kei entered high-altitude mountaineering, a world where she would soon begin doing things others wouldn't dare even dream of. Racing, cycling, all of it was behind her now. Ahead lay the faces and ridges of Earth's most fearsome mountains. And on the threshold of that world, she was missing one single person. A partner, alongside whom her true talent would unfold. His name was Kazuya Hiride. From 2004 on, he and Kei came together as a single rope team, and that partnership would turn her from a strong expedition member into a world-class climber. Hiride was a master of technical climbing, a man of her own kind. Like Kei, he was drawn not by marks on a map, but by blank spots, places where no human foot had yet stepped. For their first serious goal, they chose Pakistan, Golden Peak, also known as Spantik, a 7,000er with an unclimbed northwest ridge. 3 of them set out on the wall, but one fell ill and had to turn back. Kei and Hiride were left as a pair, and instead of descending after their teammate, they climbed on, along a line no one before them had ever touched. The Spantik Ridge yielded to them, something no one had managed before. That same season, the pair pulled off another first ascent. On Layla Peak, a graceful pointed summit that looks like a blade of ice driven into the sky. 2 new routes on a single trip. That's a serious statement. And the climbing world took notice. Kei and Hiride announced themselves as a team, capable of what eluded everyone else. But more important than the routes themselves was the way Kei now climbed. Her principle was fast and light. Take the bare minimum of gear, no excess weight, speed decides everything. No long siege of a mountain with a chain of camps and supply dumps. The pair moved light, carried everything on their own backs, and tried to slip through the dangerous sections as quickly as possible, while the weather held and while their strength lasted. On the hardest walls, Kei climbed without Sherpas and without supplemental oxygen. That's the most honest way to climb, and at the same time, the most dangerous. A person against the mountain, with no middlemen and no safety net from above. If something went wrong, there'd be no help to wait for at that altitude. Success here can't be bought with a number of porters or a stockpile of cylinders. Only skill, speed, and nerve decided. That's how her style took shape. Famous summits with beaten trails no longer interested Kei. She was drawn to where the mystery still lived. With that character, she entered the densest years of her career, when she would have to climb ever higher and find out just how far her own style could take her. In those years, it was as if two Kei Taniguchis were living side by side. One climbed giant 8,000ers on big expeditions. The other took on steep technical walls in a team of two. And Kei herself knew perfectly well which of them was the real one. She considered the walls her true calling. In 2005, she and Hirade climbed the southeast ridge of Muztagh-Ada in China, a high, snow-covered mountain on the edge of the desert. That same season, the pair climbed Shivling in India, partly by a new, never-before-traveled variation of the route. Shivling is an iconic mountain, steep and beautiful, and only a handful of people can climb it by their own line. This was her element, a small team, an unexplored line, complete self-reliance, and alongside it ran her second life. Kei kept working on commercial cleanup expeditions, and they gave her something you can't get on a technical wall, experience at extreme altitude. So in 2006, she climbed Manaslu, the 8th highest peak in the world. And in 2007, she returned to Everest and this time reached the summit itself, again from the Tibetan side. Climbing those famous giants made her a name. More and more people came to know of Taniguchi. No longer a cleaner on the slopes, but a climber who had stood on the highest points of the planet. Only she herself knew the true worth of that fame. Big mountains with crowds of participants and lines of the porters were not what she came into mountaineering for. On crowded routes, she felt like one of the many, not a pioneer. Her heart belonged to something else. The quiet, deserted walls where there are no trails, no clues, no guarantees, where everything rests on two people, and the mountain is seeing a human being for the very first time. It was the famous giants that brought her recognition, but joy came only from what no one before her had ever climbed. You can't live like that for long. Sooner or later, Kei would have to choose, to stake everything on her own style, with no glance back at the safe, proven paths. And in 2008, just such a chance came along. Ahead lay a wall that would become the most important of her life, and would bring her an award no woman in the world had ever received before. It happened in India. The mountain is called Kamet, 7,756 meters, one of the highest in the Garhwal Himalaya, right on the border with Tibet. Its enormous southeast face had stood unclimbed until they came. No human had ever set foot on it. Before them stood a colossus, about 1,800 meters of steep ice, rock, and snow rising into the sky. A height hard even to picture, 5 Eiffel Towers stacked one on top of another, and a bit more on top. And every meter of that ascent had yet to be drawn on a single map. What awaited higher up, the pair did not know. Where they'd pitch the tent, where they'd find a passage, and where the route would run into a dead end. They went the way they were used to, light, with no safety net of camp stocked in advance. On a wall of that size, that meant total isolation. Help would not come, and if anything went wrong, they'd have to descend on their own. Every extra kilogram in the pack slows you down, but running short of food, gas, or hardware could turn into a catastrophe. A chess game on a vertical wall where a mistake costs you your life. Day after day they crept up the wall, sleeping on narrow ledges hacked into the slope. The cold cut to the bone, the air was thin. The tension never let up for a second. There was no relaxing, one wrong step, and you'd fly into the abyss. But the pair climbed on, stubborn and calculating, unraveling the riddle of the route meter by meter. On October 5th, 2008, Kei Taniguchi and Kazuya Hirade reached the summit of Kamet. They did what no one had managed. As a pair, traveling light, they laid down a new line on a huge unclimbed wall. The route would later be named Samurai Direct, a straight, uncompromising path through the heart of the mountain. A climb of that caliber is rare, even among the strongest pairs on the planet, but the summit is only half the job. The descent from such a wall is no less dangerous than the climb. Fatigue builds, attention drifts, and the mountain doesn't forgive carelessness on the way back. The pair got down safely, and that single climb placed the name Taniguchi among the best mountaineers in the world. And in 2009, that was made official. For the route on Kamet, the pair was awarded the Piolet d'Or, the highest honor in world mountaineering, a kind of mountain Oscar. Every year, the jury selects the finest ascents on the planet, and making that list is the dream of anyone who climbs. And here, one short word entered the story. First. Kei Taniguchi became the first woman in the entire history of the Piolet d'Or. Before her, The list of laureates had been all men. Big high-altitude mountaineering had remained, for decades, an almost entirely male world. That one word changed everything. Now she was not just a strong climber, but the person who had opened the door for women into the most closed club in big mountain climbing. Here it's worth being honest about one detail. The PLA d'Or is awarded not to an individual, but to a climb, that is, to the whole rope team. So, Kei did not receive it alone. She shared the award with Kazuya Hiraide, her partner on the wall of Kamet. On that face there were two of them, and the prize rightfully belongs to both. At home, she wasn't overlooked either. The Japanese alpine club called Taniguchi one of the most technically skilled climbers in the world. For a country with deep mountain traditions, one that has given the world many outstanding climbers, that is the highest praise. Young Japanese mountaineers began to look up to her, and her routes became a benchmark of a clean, uncompromising style. And yet, a curious thing happened with her fame. In the narrow world of mountaineering, everyone knew her. But beyond it, to the wider public abroad, the name Taniguchi meant almost nothing. Kei didn't chase cameras and loud interviews. Her language was understood only by those who had themselves been on the big walls. Kamet would remain her defining climb, the mountain she'd be remembered by. The high point of her sporting life had been reached, but ahead of Kei lay anything but one unbroken triumph. The very style that had brought her the PLA d'Or would soon run up against its own limits, and she herself would begin to look for something more in the mountains than awards, and those limits made themselves felt very soon. Everything has a flip side. When you carry only the bare essentials, you're left with no margin of safety and no right to a mistake. There's no reserve to wait out a long spell of bad weather, or to storm a mountain again and again. And when the mountain is stronger, the only sensible way out is to retreat. In 2010, they learned this twice, the hard way. First, Kei and Hiraide attempted Kunyang Chish in Pakistan, one of the highest and most fearsome 7,000ers of the Karakoram. The mountain wouldn't let them in, and they turned back. Then the same story on Gauri Sankar in Tibet. Two serious plans in 1 year, and both came to nothing. For a climber used to winning, that's a heavy blow. A stretch of bad weather, or an impassable section, is enough to send months of preparation down the drain. The pair saw their ceiling clearly, but they weren't built to stay in retreat for long. Already in 2011, they answered their failures the way only the best do, with a bold new first ascent. The target was Naimonanyi in Tibet, a mighty mountain of nearly 7,700 meters, standing off to the side of the popular routes. They laid down a new line up the southeast face, a path no one before them had traveled. What's more, on this mountain the pair reached, for the first time in history, its south summit, which had never been climbed at all. That made two first ascents in a single climb, the kind of thing the mountaineering world remembers for years. It was their resounding answer to all the doubters. Yes, sometimes they retreated, but at the peak of their form, this pair still had no equals. Kei and Hiraide showed once again that together they were capable of things that would never even occur to anyone else. And no one back then could guess that their great partnership was already approaching its final chapter. It began, like so many before it, with a victory. In 2013, Kei climbed Iran, a 7,000er in the Pakistani Karakoram, a beautiful snow pyramid that has stood for centuries above the green valleys of the Hunza people. The climb succeeded, and from the outside, it seemed the pair of Taniguchi and Hiraide were as strong as ever, ready for new big goals. But that same season, they had another, far more cherished goal: Sispare, an elegant and fearsome 7,000er in that same Karakoram. For Kazuya Hiraide, it was not just another mountain. He had dreamed of Sispare for years. The summit sat inside him like an obsession, a personal account left unsettled. And when Kei caught fire with the same dream, Hiraide would later admit it was as if she'd stolen it from him, so fiercely did she seize his desire to climb this very peak. The two of them set out on the mountain, but Sispare wouldn't let them in. Somewhere around 5,700 meters, the route stopped them, whether it was the conditions, the state of the slope, or simply a sober assessment of the risk. And they made the decision that is always hardest for strong climbers: to turn back without reaching the summit. Sispare remained unconquered. In that moment, neither he nor she yet knew that this climb was their last together. The great partnership, the very one that had climbed an impossible line on Kamet and made a double first ascent on Naimonani, was quietly, with no loud words or announcements, coming to an end. It wasn't a quarrel or a drama that parted them. It was simply life and the mountains leading each of them onto a separate road. For Kei, it was a turning point, both as an athlete and as a person. Hiraido had been more than a partner to her. It was alongside him that she became who she became, climbed her finest routes, rose onto the pedestal of world mountaineering. A rope team of two people in the mountains is a special kind of trust you won't find in ordinary life. You are literally holding another's life on a single rope, and they are holding yours. Parting with a partner like that is not easy. And yet, Kei wasn't one to look back with regret. She was already past 40, and she felt it was time to change phases, to seek in the mountains not only new summits, but a new meaning. Ahead lay a different rope partner, and an entirely different role, in which she would unfold in unexpected ways. A star of world mountaineering was preparing to take a step that would surprise many. That step had a simple rule that Kei had long ago worked out for herself. Life, she believed, divides in two. Before 40, a person absorbs, learning, gaining experience, taking from the world. And after 40 comes the time to give back, to share what you've gathered with those who come after. And so, having crossed that line, she began to live by the second half of her own rule. To give back didn't mean to stop. Her own climbs continued. It was just that now there was a new partner at her side, Junji Wada. With him, Kei discovered Alaska, the harsh land of glaciers and forbidding walls in the north of America. In 2014, they did something extraordinary there. In 38 days, they climbed 4 new routes, 4 lines that hadn't been on the map before, on a single astonishingly productive trip. The climbing world turned to look at her again. For that series of ascents, Kei received the Piolet d'Or Asia, a prestigious award separate from the main prize for Kamet. So, Taniguchi proved that, even past 40, and with a new partner, she remained among the strongest. Her name sounded once more alongside the best climbers of the continent, though the real change in her wasn't about the awards. That same year, 2014, Kei took on an entirely different role. She led a group of 4 young Japanese women climbers into the mountains, to the summit of Mansail in Nepal, where no one had ever set foot before. Under her leadership, the newcomers made a first ascent. Kei was no longer storming a summit for her own sake. Now she was passing on her skill, her caution, and her passion for the unexplored to the next generation. For that climb, and for the whole undertaking of teaching the young, she received a separate award. But the point wasn't the award. It was that Kei found a new meaning. The girl who had once chosen a faraway mountain from a book, as her dream had herself, becomes such a book for someone, such an example. She led those taking their first steps, and she watched the same fire flare up in their eyes that had once kindled in her. More and more often she would pull into the big mountains those who weren't yet sure of themselves. A lone star became a mentor. It seemed she had found a balance between her own ambition and her generosity, between the hunger for new walls and the desire to give. Life was full, plans were laid out years in advance, and one of them was calling her back, to an enormous unclimbed wall in the distant Himalaya, to a climb that would become the most enigmatic of her career. The mountain stands in Nepal, and its name is strange, almost symbolic, Pandora. In 2015, Kei traveled there with Junji Wada to climb a huge wall that no one had ever taken. The challenge was right up her alley, a wild, little-studied place, a mountain about which almost nothing is known, a line she'd have to unravel from scratch. The pair climbed upward, but Pandora proved too tough a nut to crack. Somewhere at 2/3 of the height, Kei and Wada were forced to turn around. The mountain remained unclimbed. For most people, that would have been a disappointing failure, one more retreat in a long list. Kei saw something entirely different in it. When she got back, she let drop a phrase that would later sound almost prophetic. She said she had opened the lid of Pandora's box just a crack, and that she would definitely return to look inside and find out what was hidden there. That's all of Kei Taniguchi in a single phrase. What drew her was not a victory over the mountain, but the mystery itself, the thing concealed behind the unknown. An unclosed door pulled at her more strongly than any summit already won. To understand her, it's worth listening to what she said and wrote about herself. Kei called herself simply a traveler through the mountains of the world. Not a conqueror, not a record setter, but precisely a wanderer, moving from one unknown land to another. Climbing in unexplored mountains, she admitted, is like life itself. You don't know what lies ahead, and that's exactly what makes the journey alive. She wanted her future to remain a mystery, and she was drawn to where the least is known about the mountains, where you can meet wild nature as it really is, with no clues and no beaten trails. There's something deeper in those words, too. At the harsh altitudes, Kei said, you see clearly how small and helpless a person is before the mountains. And it was there, too, that she felt most acutely what a person is capable of. The mountain humbled her, and the same mountain gave her a sense of boundless strength. On that contradiction, in essence, her whole life rested. So Kei headed home, full of plans to return one day to Pandora and finally open her box. It seemed to her there was still plenty of time ahead, a whole second half of life devoted to the mountains and to people. She did not know that she was never destined to return to that wall. Less than a year remained before the winter that would erase it all, and disaster was waiting for her, not on some fearsome Himalayan wall, but where she would least expect to find it. In December of 2015, Kei came to Hokkaido, in the far north of the country, to the mountain of Kurodake. After Kamet, Everest, and the Tibetan 7000ers, that name sounds almost unserious. Kurodake is only 1,984 meters high. Next to the giants among which Kei had spent her life, it isn't even a mountain, but a hill. In summer, an ordinary cable car runs up here, and tourists stroll the slopes. Only the numbers are deceptive here. Kei hadn't come for an easy walk. In winter, Kurodake is transformed. The slopes are wrapped in snow and ice, and one side is a genuine steep wall. It was up this technical north face that Kei's group meant to climb. This was a full-fledged winter ascent, with ropes, ice tools, and total concentration. The plan was beautiful and bold. The group wanted to climb the harsh wall on the way up, and then ski down the other side of the mountain, across untouched snow. A climb up ice and rock, then a high-speed descent. For experienced mountain athletes, that's the ideal winter adventure, thrilling and technical. The team was 5, Kei, and 4 men. Serious people, used to mountains and winter routes. Among them was Daisuke Sasaki, a well-known ski mountaineer, a master of descents on wild, unprepared slopes. No casual tourists, a well-prepared crew that understood exactly what they were getting into. Each of them had been many times in places far more dangerous than this modest Japanese peak. On the 20th of December, the group set out on the route. Winter was in full swing, with several days of work on the wall and a long-awaited descent ahead. Nothing foreshadowed disaster. For Kei, who had climbed the most difficult walls on the planet, this ascent was more of a rest than a test. Kurodake seemed to her a small, manageable mountain where there was simply nothing that could go wrong. And it's precisely in that sense of safety that the main threat was hiding. At great heights where any step could be your last, a climber is concentrated to the limit. But here, on a low, homely mountain, vigilance involuntarily dulls. Kei had come through the giant walls of the Himalaya alive and unharmed. And here, on a modest slope, she was about to take one simple, ordinary step, and it would decide her fate. And then, that moment came. The group had already passed the hardest part of the wall, the steep ice and rock where every movement demanded total attention. The most dangerous part was behind them. The climbers came out onto a gentle section near the summit ridge, where the slope eases off and you can finally catch your breath. After the tense ascent, the place seemed calm and safe. They stopped to rest. Kei unclipped from the rope. On a technical wall, the rope linking a team is a lifeline. It will hold a climber if they fall. But here it seemed already unnecessary. Kei took it off and stepped aside from the group for a minute, behind a large rock, to be alone. A few steps, an ordinary everyday movement that anyone makes without a second thought. Around 3 in the afternoon, the 21st of December, Kei disappeared behind the rock and her companions lost sight of her. Nothing alarming, she was just a stone's throw away, and the slope underfoot seemed firm. The group waited calmly. No one sensed any danger. A minute, then another. Kei didn't come back. At first her companions thought nothing of it. People get held up. But time passed, and still she wasn't there. Calm gave way to a slight unease, the unease to alarm. They called out. No answer, and then it became clear. Something had gone wrong. They got up and walked toward that rock, and what they saw was impossible to take in. Kei was nowhere. Where she should have been standing there were only tracks in the snow and the edge of the slope, dropping away below into the cold emptiness. Beyond the edge, a steep couloir fell away hundreds of meters. A few meters separated her from the group. For a minute she had unclipped the rope, and those few meters, with that rope off, were enough. In what seemed like flat, ordinary ground, where no one expects disaster, in a single instant, the irreparable happened. A climber who had come through the greatest walls on the planet vanished on a modest mountain, simply by stepping aside without protection. Now, her companions faced the hardest task of all, to find her and understand what had happened. The search began right there, by that ill-fated rock, and the first findings left no room for hope. On the northwest side, right at the rock, her companions spotted Kei's belongings, both gloves and her pack on the snow. She had taken them off before stepping away, an ordinary thing to do during a rest. But now those abandoned gloves looked like a mute sign of what had happened. A little lower, about 150 meters down, marks of a fall were visible on the slope, traces leading down toward the drop-off. The picture came together, and it was terrible. Kei had fallen from the edge and flown down the steep couloir. Her companions tried to descend after her, but quickly that was impossible. The December weather on Hokkaido is merciless. Snow, wind, a short day. The mountain, which only recently had seemed harmless, now would not let them near. The rescue operation had to be postponed. Only the next morning, the 22nd of December, at about 9:30, was Kei's body found. She lay far below, about 700 meters beneath the point where the group had finished the climb, in the Kurodake Sawa Gorge, half buried in snow. 700 meters is a height from which you don't come back. It was clear Kei had died the day before, almost immediately after the fall. There was no doubt about the cause of death. In the fall, Kei had suffered injuries incompatible with life. According to the medical examiners, death was instantaneous. The Hokkaido police, after studying the circumstances, issued an official ruling. An accident. An accidental fall from the cliff. So ended the life of one of the most outstanding climbers of her generation, 43 years old, at the very height of her strength and experience. Not on a fearsome 8,000er, not under an avalanche, not in a blizzard on a huge wall, but on a small mountain less than 2 kilometers high, a few steps from her own companions. The woman who had walked the very edge for years, on the highest peaks of the planet and come down alive every time, did not survive a short rest on a simple slope. And the most bitter part is how much was left unfinished. Her plans were laid out years ahead. Pandora's box remained unopened, and along with Kei, beneath the snow of Hokkaido, lay the very riddle of her death. The questions that her companions, her family, and the whole mountaineering world would seek an answer to and never find. And the chief of them is the simplest. What exactly happened in those few seconds behind the rock? No one saw the moment of the fall. Kei went off alone, vanished from view, and fell where no one could watch her. Did she slip on the iced-over snow, stumble at the very edge? Or did the lip of the slope, which had seemed solid, collapse under her weight? There is no exact answer, and there never will be. That secret the mountain kept to itself. Even the basic details disagree. In some accounts, Kei falls during the ascent. In others, the tragedy happens afterward, during the rest, or on the descent. The most reliable version is this. The pair had passed the difficult part of the wall and were resting near the summit. But no single universally accepted account ever came together. Even the date of death is doubled. The fall happens on the 21st of December, but the body is found, and death is officially confirmed only on the morning of the 22nd. So some sources give one date, others another, and both are correct in their own way. And a full formal investigation report that would have dotted all the I's was never published. The group itself also stayed in the shadows. Of Kei's 4 companions, only one is known by name, the ski mountaineer Daisuke Sasaki, whose testimony forms the basis of what we know. The names of the other 3 never became public. Those who were a few meters from Kei in her final hour remained nameless. The only conjecture about the cause of the fall came from her father. In his words, Kei most likely lost her concentration for a brief instant, that very composure that had never failed her on lethally dangerous walls. On a simple slope, where it seemed safe to relax, an instant was enough. but that is only the guess of a man who loved her, not an established fact. So, the story of Kei Taniguchi remains without its final page. We know where and when her life was cut short, but we don't know the exact how, and even less the why it happened just so. And yet, her chief legacy will be not these bitter riddles, but what she left behind for people and for the mountains. And that legacy turned out to be considerable. The news of her death instantly swept across Japan and the entire mountaineering world. The country's largest newspapers wrote about Kei. The leading mountain publications of the planet ran obituaries for her. The loss of the first woman to win the Piolet d'Or, and under such circumstances, shook many. Ken Noguchi, the very man who had once brought her into the big mountains, confessed that he had long carried a fear for her. With her uncompromising, sharp style, a day like this, he said, was bound to come sooner or later. He had feared it for years, and still he wasn't ready. But it didn't end in grief alone. While still alive, Kei had set aside some savings, around 7 million yen. After her death, that money became the foundation of a fund in her name. The fund's purpose is to help young climbers make first ascents, go into unexplored mountains, do the things Kei herself had loved. So, her passion lives on in other people's climbs, paving the way for those who come after. In March of 2016, people came to say goodbye to Kei. More than 500 gathered for the memorial. Friends, family, climbers, athletes, colleagues from work. Several completely different worlds in which she had lived came together in one hall for one person. Such a farewell is granted to few. She wasn't forgotten afterward either. In 2019, a substantial book about her life came out, and its first chapter takes the reader back to those very December days on Kurodake. In 2023, a documentary film was made about Kei. Her story keeps leading on those who never knew her. And the most piercing point in this story is set by her former partner. In 2017, Kazuya Hiraide returned to Cispare, the very mountain that had once refused to let the two of them in. This time, he reached the summit, and there, at the top, on the peak of their shared unfulfilled dream, he left a photograph of Kei. The mountain that had once held out against them was finally taken, and Kei symbolically climbed it together with him. With that, the story of the great partnership quietly comes to a close. In July of 2024, Kazuya Hiraide died in the mountains to which he had given his life, on the west face of K2, one of the most fearsome walls in the world. Two people who had climbed impossible routes together now remained forever where they were truly free, high up among the snow, the ice, and the unexplored summits. And the box of Pandora that Kei had dreamed of still stands ajar, alluring, mysterious, calling the next ones to go farther, to where no one has ever been.